test that we worked on. We may have also talked about the sexual assault kit items again.
Okay. Do you recall whether or not you did any, for lack of a better term, amplification on the sexual assault kit items between the 10th and the 21st to try to determine if you could?
Yes, right, yeah, so that's correct. We did have some, as I said, some of the sexual assault kit items gave us very poor profiles first time through. So we went back to those, and we have ways of concentrating and turning up the volume on our results. And so we went back and worked those to try to get better profiles, identify more markers on those items. And on some of those, we were successful. And so I'm sure I'd forgotten about that. I'm sure we did talk about that at the meeting.
Okay. And that was, from your previous testimony, that was not to, that wouldn't have been to determine anything about the players because you had already excluded them from that DNA.
Right. We did not anticipate that that would change the previous conclusions, but we did, however, want to improve the quality of those profiles so that perhaps it would match a suspect, further down.
Somebody other than the lacrosse players.
Somebody other than the ones we previously tested.
And if you'll look, I'd like to do it rather than on the screen here. If you'll look in the notebook at 210C. Can you look?
Oh, you want me to look at the notebook?
Yeah, unless you have it some other.
I do, but if you want me to look at here so that it's on the record.
I'm sorry, it's not easy to find things in here.
You're trying to say we can't follow numeric tabs, us scientists?
Apparently not, but I wasn't going to say it out loud. There you go.
Thank you.
And if you look at Exhibit 210C, is that an evidence item that was completed prior to, the analysis was completed prior to the April 21st meeting?
Yes, this was completed on April 11th.
Okay, so that's immediately or shortly after your first meeting.
That's correct.
And what evidence item is that for?
This is for it's the stain. It's a stain lifted off of the panties. It's the epithelial fraction of a stain lifted off the panties.
And does this analysis of that other panty stain indicate the presence of DNA characteristics from multiple males?
Yes, it does. Yes.
And what is the...
you all can see it up there? You got it?
What is the minimum number of males who contributed DNA to this section of Miss Mangum's panties?
Well, that's a tough call because some of the results, some of these markers are only barely resolved. So I would say there's a minimum of 4 males here. It's at that point I'm giving it my best guess of 4 males at least in this mixture of DNA.
And was the analyst able to compare the DNA characteristics you found with the players' reference specimens?
Yes.
And did any of those multiple DNA characteristics match any of the suspects' reference specimens or profiles?
No. None of the possible contributors to this multiple contributor profile can be one of the suspects in this case analyzed to that date.
And the let me ask you.
I just want to show you what I mean by amplify. I'm gonna just. Can I show you this?
What do you?
This is the and it's important, I think, because this is the first profile that we obtained from that specimen, and so we went back and reworked it and got this result, and that's why we would have talked about it at the meeting. We went from having basically no profile to a profile that showed male DNAs. It shows the importance of this.
I need to show this to opposing counsel before I don't have this.
That's not We're following along with this case as you are. You can see a technical problem happened there inside that room of the North Carolina Court of Appeals. Picture is back now, so hopefully we'll listen in without any more delays.
Yes. So by April 10th, we would have had that first item that I just showed you. And to my eye and to the analyst's eye, there are indications on there that there's male DNA underlying that, even though it didn't come up on the plot. So that's one of those cases where we went back, not one of those cases, one of those specimens, we went back and we basically concentrated down and I don't want to use the term amplify, but we enhance our procedure so that we can see what was underlying, and that produced this second plot here.
So if I understand
Hold on
you,
a second. We have no objection. Yeah, no objection. All right, thank you.
is it acceptable, Chairman, if we show that to you?
Do you have any objection to marking that as an additional exhibit, or? No objection. Okay.
If it's acceptable, then we can just make it part of 210C, or however you want to handle that. Is it a fair characterization, Dr. Meehan, that for that particular item, that particular candy stain, that initially on April 10th, there was, you were only able to detect a small amount of DNA?
For that particular...
I would object to the form of the question about what a fair characterization is.
I'm sorry, I was looking at this.
I'll rephrase it.
Yeah, if you'll rephrase it.
Just let Dr. Justin.
The initial test result that you had by the April 10th meeting for that particular item, can you characterize how much DNA you were able to detect in that initial testing?
We weren't able to detect any DNA that would pass our quality standards by that initial test. We were only, because we have a trained eye, like a radiologist has a trained eye to identify fractures in the bone. We were able to identify that there is some DNA there that's not sufficient to pass our quality standards to make an identification of that DNA on the April 10th meeting.
Okay. And then you went back and amplified or enhanced it somehow to find something additional.
That's right. So, and the reason I bring that up is because the difference between that and this other plot that you were looking at is dramatic. And that's why we would have talked about it at the meeting.
Okay. And so when you did that for some of the sexual assault kit items, and you found additional DNA, were those things that you discussed with Mr. Nifong at the April 21st meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And if you can just, rather than going through each one of them individually, can you look at 210C?
Right, that's what we just did.
And 210D? And then I just want to ask some questions just collectively about those.
Okay.
And 210E. And 210, no, I'm sorry, were those analysis that were done on sexual assault kit items between the April 10th meeting and the April 21st meeting?
Yes.
And were those things like, all those things that you would have discussed with Mr. Nifong at that second meeting in April 21st?
Yes.
And do they indicate whether or not there is male DNA on these additional sexual assault kit items?
Yes, just by nature of the fact that we have markers identified on these plots, it means there's male DNA present. And in the comparison that the analyst did to the reference specimens, none of the reference specimens could have contributed to these profiles.
Okay, so for each one of these additional sexual assault kit items that was discussed on the 21st, you were able to compare those against the player's reference specimens as well?
Yes.
And what was your conclusion about whether they matched?
There were no matches. None of the reference specimens could contribute to these profiles.
If you'll flip forward to 210F.